Alexander Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over the skyline. His reflection stared back at him, a tall man in an expensive suit with tired eyes that had seen too many spreadsheets and not enough sunsets. At 45, he had built TechVision into one of the world's most valuable companies, but today, the empire he'd created felt hollow. On his desk sat the final divorce papers. After 15 years of marriage, his relationship with Elena was over, reduced to signatures on legal documents and the division of assets. Alexander ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair and sighed. How had they reached this point? He remembered meeting Elena at a charity gala 16 years ago. She was brilliant, an art conservator with warm brown eyes and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. While Alexander built tech empires, Elena restored beauty to the world, bringing forgotten masterpieces back to life with patient hands. Those early days had been magical. Traveling the world, staying up all night talking about their dreams, making plans for a future together. Mr. Reed? His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your lawyer is on line 1 about the settlement terms. Alexander picked up the phone, his voice businesslike despite the heaviness in his chest. Tell him whatever Elena wants, she gets. I don't care about the money. The settlement was generous by any standard. Elena would receive their beachfront house, a substantial cash payment, and shares in TechVision. Alexander knew it was fair, but money couldn't fix what was truly broken between them. Later that evening, he poured himself a drink and thought back to when things began to unravel. The late nights at the office had started to pile up. The canceled dinners, the postponed vacations. Each time, Elena had understood at first, but understanding had its limits. You're never really here, Alex, she had told him during one of their last serious conversations. Even when you're sitting right beside me, your mind is somewhere else. I can't compete with your company anymore. He had promised to change, to be more present, to prioritize their marriage. But promises made in moments of crisis were easy to forget when the next business emergency arose. And there was always a next emergency. Their arguments had grown more frequent, then more bitter, then finally silent. The silence was the worst part. They had become like strangers sharing a home, orbiting each other without connecting. Elena stopped telling him about her day. Alexander stopped sharing his ideas. The space between them grew until it couldn't be bridged. I don't want to be an afterthought in someone's life, Elena had finally said 3 months ago, her voice calm but resolved. We both deserve better than this half-life we're living. Alexander hadn't fought her on it. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had chosen his company over their marriage 1,000 times in 1,000 small ways. The divorce was just making official what had already happened in their hearts. The next morning, Alexander met Elena and their lawyers at his attorney's office. It was the first time he'd seen her in weeks. She looked different. Her hair was shorter and she carried herself with a quiet confidence he hadn't seen in years. The weight of their failing marriage had lifted from her shoulders, and Alexander felt an unexpected pang of something like regret. You look well, he said as they waited for the lawyers to prepare the final documents. I am well, Elena replied, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm moving back to my hometown after this, starting fresh. The coastal place, where your grandmother lived. Alexander was surprised to find he still remembered this detail from their early dating days. Elena nodded. It's quiet there. Simple. Everything I need right now. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with all the things they'd never said, and now never would. Alexander wanted to tell her he was sorry, that he wished he'd been a better husband, that part of him still loved the woman who used to fall asleep with her head on his shoulder while they watched old movies. But the words stuck in his throat. I hope you find happiness, Alex, Elena said softly, breaking the silence. Real happiness, not just success. Before he could respond, the lawyers returned with the papers. They signed their names, and just like that, 15 years together was officially over. No drama, no tears, just the quiet scratch of pens on paper and the closing of a chapter. As they walked out of the building, Alexander offered his hand. I wish you all the best, Elena. She took his hand briefly, then reached up to straighten his tie one last time, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. Take care of yourself, Alex, and maybe someday, Try to remember there's a world outside those office windows. Then she was gone, walking toward the taxi that would take her to her new life, one that didn't include him. In the days that followed, Alexander threw himself into work with renewed intensity. If his employees noticed the dark circles under his eyes or his shorter-than-usual temper, they were wise enough not to mention it. He scheduled back-to-back meetings, approved new projects, and pushed the development team to meet impossible deadlines. Exhaustion was preferable to the silence of his empty penthouse. "Sir, you need to eat something," his concerned assistant Lisa said one evening, placing a sandwich on his desk. "And maybe consider going home before midnight? You've been here since 5 this morning." Alexander looked up from his computer screen, blinking as if coming out of a trance. "What time is it?" "Nearly 10, sir." Lisa had been with him for 12 years and was one of the few people who could speak to him with such directness. The rest of the executive team left hours ago. "Just finishing up a few things," he muttered, though in truth, he couldn't remember what he'd been working on for the past hour. "The company won't collapse if you take a break," Lisa said gently. "That's what you built those management layers for, remember?" Alexander rubbed his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had a good teacher in watching what not to do," she replied with a pointed look. That night, Alexander went home early, if 10:30 could be considered early. The penthouse felt cavernous, Elena's absence palpable in every room. He wandered through the space, noticing for the first time how few personal touches remained. The walls where her artwork had hung were bare. The shelves that had held her books were empty. Even the smell of her favorite jasmine candles had faded. He opened his phone and scrolled through old photos. Elena laughing on a beach in Bali. Elena focused on restoring a painting in her studio. Elena asleep on his shoulder during a long flight. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else. To a different Alexander who had once known how to be happy outside of boardrooms and business deals. Alexander poured himself a drink and walked out onto the terrace. The city stretched before him, a sea of lights and possibilities. He had conquered this world, built something remarkable from nothing. His name was on buildings and in business textbooks. But standing there alone, he wondered what it had cost him. The next morning, he called his executive team together. "I'm taking some time away," he announced to their shocked faces. 2 weeks. Phillips, you'll handle operations. Chen, you're in charge of the Singapore deal. Weekly reports by email only. Are you ill, sir? His CFO asked, clearly concerned by this unprecedented behavior. No, Alexander replied, straightening his tie. Just overdue for some perspective. He spent the first 3 days of his vacation checking email constantly and calling the office twice a day. By day 4, he'd forced himself to check only morning and evening. By the end of the week, he was down to once a day, surprised to find the company continuing to function without his constant oversight. Alexander traveled, not to the luxury resorts or major capitals where he usually stayed for business, but to quiet, anonymous places. He hiked mountains in New Zealand, sat in small cafes in Portugal, and walked the quiet streets of small Japanese towns where no one knew his name or net worth. In a small bookshop in Kyoto, he found himself buying a novel, something he hadn't done in years. That night, instead of checking financial reports, he read until dawn, remembering how he and Elena used to read to each other when they were first married. When he returned to New York after 2 weeks, he was different, not dramatically, but noticeably. He delegated more. He left the office by 7 most nights. He started a tradition of taking his management team to lunch once a week, asking about their families and lives outside work. But despite these changes, Alexander Reed remained fundamentally alone. His empire continued to grow. TechVision expanded into new markets. His personal fortune doubled, then tripled. From the outside, his life looked perfect, the quintessential success story. Yet each night he returned to an empty penthouse. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he wondered where Elena was and if she'd found the happiness she sought. He never looked her up or asked mutual friends about her. Some doors once closed were better left that way. Besides, he told himself they had both moved on. It was better this way. Little did Alexander know that life had other plans. Plans that would begin to unfold 7 years later, in a small coastal town at the opening of a science academy that bore his name. 7 years passed like the turning pages of a calendar, each day blending into the next. Alexander's life settled into a predictable rhythm of board meetings, product launches, and charity galas. Tech vision had nearly doubled in size, expanding into artificial intelligence and renewable energy. Business magazines called him a visionary. Financial analysts tracked his every move. Yet for all his success, Alexander's personal life remained as empty as his penthouse's spare bedroom. It was his assistant Lisa who first suggested the STEM Academy project. Education initiatives look good for the company. Image, she pointed out one morning, sliding a proposal across his desk. And you mentioned wanting to do something more meaningful with the foundation money. Alexander leafed through the pages. The idea was simple enough. Fund cutting-edge science and technology academies in underserved communities across the country. Give bright kids the resources they needed to become the next generation of innovators. We could start with 5 locations, Lisa continued. East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, South, and there's this small coastal town that's shown impressive results with their existing programs despite limited funding. Alexander paused on the page showing the coastal town, Bayshore. Something about the name tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. Fine, he said, initialing the proposal. Make it happen. 18 months later, Alexander's private jet touched down at a small regional airport. The Bayshore STEM Academy was the last of the 5 to open, and while he normally sent representatives to these events, something had compelled him to attend this one personally. Mr. Reed, welcome to Bayshore. The academy principal, a woman named Dr. Winters, greeted him enthusiastically. The students and faculty are thrilled you could come. We've prepared a tour of our new facilities. Alexander nodded politely, following her into the gleaming new building that bore his name on the entrance. Inside, the halls buzzed with excitement. Students and teachers had set up demonstrations of their projects in each classroom. It was a far cry from the sterile corporate ceremonies he usually attended. Our program focuses on hands-on learning, Dr. Winters explained as they walked. Theory is important, but we believe children learn best by doing, by experimenting, by sometimes failing and trying again. Alexander found himself actually listening, impressed by the passion in her voice. They stopped at various classrooms, where eager students demonstrated robots, sustainable energy models, and computer programs they'd created. And here's our youngest group, Dr. Winters said, ushering him into a bright classroom decorated with colorful scientific posters and plants growing in specialized containers. These are our 7 to 8-year-olds, but don't let their age fool you. They're working on some remarkable projects. Alexander scanned the room with polite interest that quickly turned to stunned attention. In the corner, 4 children worked together around a table, their heads bent in concentration over what appeared to be some sort of water filtration system. Something about them made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. What's that project? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. That's one of our most promising groups, Dr. Winters beamed. They're designing a solar-powered water purification system that's portable enough for emergency relief situations. Quite advanced for their age. Alexander moved closer, drawn by a force he couldn't name. As if sensing his approach, one of the children looked up. A boy with serious eyes and a thoughtful expression. Alexander nearly stumbled. Those eyes. They were his eyes. The same unusual steel blue color that looked back at him from the mirror every morning. And the shape of the boy's face, the strong jawline that Alexander had inherited from his father, softened slightly but unmistakable. Before he could process this, the other 3 children looked up as well. 2 girls and another boy, all with the same eyes, the same facial structure, different in small ways. One girl had freckles across her nose. One boy had slightly curlier hair, but the resemblance was undeniable. They looked like siblings. They looked like him. Mr. Reed, are you all right? Dr. Winters asked, noticing his sudden pallor. Alexander swallowed hard. Yes, fine, just impressed by the students. The smallest of the 4 children, a girl with her hair in 2 braids, stood up and approached him without hesitation. Are you the man who paid for our new science equipment? She asked, looking up at him with curious eyes. His eyes, Alexander nodded, finding it difficult to speak. Thank you, she said seriously. Our old microscopes couldn't see bacteria properly. Now we can. Do you want to see our water cleaner? We made it better than the instructions. Lily, Dr. Winters chided gently. Mr. Reed is very busy and has many classrooms to visit. It's fine, Alexander said quickly. I'd love to see their project. The girl, Lily, took his hand as naturally as if she'd known him forever, and led him to their table. Her small fingers felt warm in his, sending a jolt of something unfamiliar through his chest. "I'm Lily. That's Owen, that's Rose, and that's David," she introduced, pointing to each of her project partners in turn. "We're quadruplets. That means we were born on the same day from the same mom. People think we're identical, but we're not. Only Owen and David are really identical. Rose and I just look similar." "Quadruplets," Alexander repeated faintly. "That's unusual. 1 in 700,000, Owen supplied without looking up from adjusting something on their project. "More common with fertility treatments, but our mom didn't have those." Alexander felt the room tilt slightly. His ex-wife's face flashed in his mind. Elena. Bayshore was Elena's hometown, where she said she was moving after the divorce. 7 years ago, these children looked about 7 years old. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Our design uses layered filtration with activated carbon and a solar-powered UV sterilization chamber, David explained, pointing to different components of their project, completely unaware of Alexander's internal earthquake. "The whole thing fits in a backpack," Rose added proudly, "for places where clean water is hard to get." Alexander forced himself to focus on their explanation, asking questions about their design choices while his mind raced. The children were articulate and thoughtful, explaining complex concepts in simple terms. They finished each other's sentences and debated small technical points with the ease of people who had been thinking together their whole lives. "That's very impressive," he managed to say when they finished their demonstration. "Mom says we get our brains from our dad," Lily informed him matter-of-factly. "She says he was super smart with computers and building things." "Was?" Alexander asked, his throat dry. "We don't know him," Owen explained with a child's blunt honesty. "Mom says he lives far away and works a lot." "I see," Alexander said, feeling as though he were having an out-of-body experience. "Well, your mom must be very proud of you." "She is," Rose nodded. "She's a teacher here. Art and history. She couldn't come today because she's homesick." Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. Elena was here in this same building, teaching at this same school. Would have been if not for a timely illness on the day of his visit. "Mr. Reed, we should continue our tour," Dr. Winters prompted gently. "We have several other classrooms waiting to show you their projects." "Of course," Alexander said, reluctantly turning away from the 4 children who looked so much like him it was impossible to ignore. As he moved toward the door, Lily called after him, "Will you come back someday to see if our water cleaner works better? We're making changes to it next week." Alexander turned, meeting 4 pairs of expectant eyes, his eyes. "I'd like that very much," he said, surprised to find he meant it. The rest of the tour passed in a blur. Alexander smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, asked the right questions, shook the right hands. But his mind remained in that classroom with 4 remarkable children who carried his face and, apparently, knew nothing of him. On the flight back to New York, Alexander sat alone in the luxurious cabin of his private jet, an untouched glass of scotch on the table before him. "Elena has children." "I children," he whispered to the empty air. Quadruplets. 4 small lives that had come into the world without his knowledge. 4 pieces of himself growing up without him. Why hadn't she told him? The divorce had been finalized before she would have known she was pregnant. Or had she known and chosen not to tell him? The thought sent a spike of anger through him, quickly followed by shame. What right did he have to be angry? He had been an absent husband. Why would she think he'd be a present father? As the jet cruised above the clouds, Alexander made a decision. He wouldn't confront Elena, not yet. But he needed to know more. About the children. About their lives. About the 7 years he had missed. He picked up his phone and called the one person he trusted for delicate matters. "Jackson, I need your help with something confidential." "Very confidential." The investigator had worked for Alexander before, handling background checks on potential business partners and gathering intelligence on competitors. This request would be different. "I need information on a woman named Elena Reed, my ex-wife, and her children. 4 of them. Quadruplets, living in Bayshore. I want to know everything. School records, medical history, daily routines. Everything." As he ended the call, Alexander stared out the window at the setting sun painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere below, in a coastal town he'd visited on a whim, were 4 children with his eyes, his jawline, his blood. 4 children he hadn't known existed until today. His life, which had seemed so orderly and defined this morning, had suddenly become complicated in ways he couldn't have imagined. And for the first time in 7 years, Alexander felt truly awake. Alexander's corner office fell silent as Jackson finished his report. The investigator closed his laptop and waited while Alexander processed everything he'd just heard. "So you're certain?" Alexander finally asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "The birth certificates list no father, but the timing aligns perfectly," Jackson confirmed. "The quadruplets were born 8 months after your divorce was finalized. Given multiple births often arrive early, the conception would have occurred while you were still married." Alexander stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of the city skyline. "And Elena never registered for child support, never made any claims against me." "None whatsoever," Jackson replied. "She used her maiden name, Chen, for the children. There's no paper trail connecting you to them. From all appearances, she's deliberately kept them separate from your life." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Tell me about them again." Jackson reopened his laptop. "Lily Rose David and Owen Chen, age 7, turning 8 next month. They attend Bayshore Elementary, where they're enrolled in the gifted program, and now participate in the STEM academy you funded. All 4 score exceptionally high on standardized tests, particularly in mathematics and science. David and Owen show strong analytical abilities. Rose excels in engineering concepts, and Lily demonstrates remarkable aptitude for creative problem solving. And their health? All healthy. No major medical issues. They were born 6 weeks premature, which is common for quadruplets but developed normally. They're slightly small for their age but otherwise thriving." Alexander nodded, taking this in. "And Elena? What about her life these past 7 years?" Jackson clicked through several files. "She moved to Bayshore immediately after your divorce. Used part of the settlement to buy a modest house near the beach. 4 bedrooms, nothing extravagant. She completed a teaching certification program while pregnant and began working at Bayshore Elementary when the children turned 3. She teaches art history and coordinates the school's cultural programs. Well respected in the community, volunteers for local beach cleanups, runs a small restoration business on the side for antique artwork, mostly for local clients." "Friends? Relationships?" Alexander asked, trying to ignore the unexpected twinge in his chest. "Some close friendships with other teachers and parents. No serious romantic relationships that I could discover. Her life revolves around the children and her work." Alexander turned from the window. "And the children don't know about me. Based on interviews with their teachers and observations, they know only that their father is someone smart who lives far away and works a lot. They don't appear to know your name or who you are." Alexander sat heavily in his chair. "Pictures?" Jackson hesitated. "I didn't take any directly, that would have been intrusive. But I can show you their school photos and some public images from the town's social media pages." He pulled up several pictures on his laptop and turned it toward Alexander. The images showed 4 happy, healthy children at a beach cleanup, at a school science fair, playing in a park. In every photo, Alexander could see traces of himself. The way Owen's eyebrows drew together in concentration, the determined set of Rose's jaw, the thoughtful tilt of David's head, Lily's analytical gaze, and in several photos, there was Elena, her hair shorter now, her face more mature but still beautiful. She looked happy, surrounded by the children laughing in the sunlight. "She appears to be an excellent mother," Jackson said quietly. "The children are well-adjusted, academically successful, and socially integrated. By all accounts, they're being raised with strong values and boundaries." Alexander stared at the images, feeling a storm of emotions he couldn't name. Anger at being kept in the dark. Wonder at these 4 small lives. Regret for what he'd missed. And beneath it all, a growing certainty about what he needed to do next. "Thank you, Jackson. Your report is thorough as always." Alexander closed the laptop. "I'll need you to arrange something else for me, sir. I want to relocate to Bayshore temporarily. Find me a suitable house there, something low-key but comfortable. And I'll need a reason to be there that won't raise suspicions." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to confront Ms. Chen?" "Eventually," Alexander said. "But not immediately. First, I need to understand the world she's created for my children. I need to see it with my own eyes." That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse looking through the pictures Jackson had sent to his private email. Four small faces, his children, looked back at him from his tablet screen. He had missed so much already. Their first words. First steps. First day of school. He hadn't been there when they were sick or scared or proud of themselves, and Elena had done it all alone. The thought humbled him. The woman he had neglected for his company had raised 4 children by herself, given them a good life, taught them to be kind and smart and curious. Why hadn't she told him? The question circled in his mind. Was it revenge for his neglect during their marriage? Protection for the children from a father she thought wouldn't care? Or had she simply believed he wouldn't want to be involved? The truth was, 7 years ago, Elena might have been right. The Alexander who had signed those divorce papers had been obsessed with his company, emotionally unavailable, unable to prioritize personal relationships over professional achievements. Would that Alexander have been a good father? Would he have made time for 4 small children when he couldn't make time for his wife? Alexander wasn't sure, but he was certain about one thing. He was not that man anymore. The past 7 years had changed him, softened some of his harder edges, taught him painful lessons about what mattered in life, and now he had a second chance, or at least he hoped he did. 2 weeks later, Alexander found himself standing on the deck of a beachfront property in Bayshore, watching the waves roll in under a bright blue sky. The house was elegant but understated, nothing like his New York penthouse with its sleek minimalism and cold perfection. This place had character, warmth. It felt like somewhere a family could be comfortable. "The paperwork is all set, sir," Jackson said, joining him on the deck. "As far as anyone knows, you're here overseeing the development of TechVision's new remote work campus. The cover story is that you're considering Bayshore for a significant expansion and want to experience the community firsthand. And the office setup, complete. You can run your company from here as needed, though your executive team still thinks you're taking a partial sabbatical for strategic planning." Alexander nodded. "And the STEM Academy? You're scheduled as a special advisor starting next week. 3 days a week working with the advanced students, including the quadruplets group." Dr. Winters was thrilled with the arrangement. "And Elena?" Jackson hesitated. "She teaches primarily on the days you won't be at the school, based on the schedule I arranged. You could go weeks without crossing paths if you wanted to." Alexander turned to look at his longtime investigator. "I'm not here to avoid her, Jackson. But I need time to understand the situation before I talk to her. I need to know my children, at least a little, before everything changes. And if she sees you at the school?" "Bayshore isn't a large town." "Then I'll deal with that when it happens," Alexander said firmly. "But I won't hide forever. She deserves to hear from me directly when the time comes." Jackson nodded. "Very well, sir. Is there anything else you need?" Alexander looked out at the ocean, feeling more nervous than he had before any business deal or product launch in his life. "Just tell me again, the children are usually at the park near the school on Sunday afternoons?" "Yes, from about 2 to 4, weather permitting. Elena takes them there every week. They have a routine: playground, ice cream from the stand by the fountain, then home." Alexander took a deep breath. "Thank you, Jackson. That will be all for now." After Jackson left, Alexander walked through the house, trying to settle his thoughts. The place was tastefully furnished but felt hollow, empty in the way only a house without children can feel. He wondered what his penthouse might have looked like with fingerprints on the glass tables, toys scattered across the pristine floors, children's artwork on the refrigerator. Sunday came more quickly than Alexander expected. He dressed carefully in casual clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Nothing that screamed billionaire tech CEO. He left his designer watch at home and drove his newly purchased, sensible SUV to the park near Bayshore Elementary. His heart pounded as he parked and walked toward the playground. Would they be there? What if Elena spotted him first? What exactly did he hope to accomplish by watching them from a distance? He didn't have answers, only an overwhelming need to see them. The 4 children who carried his blood but didn't know his name. The playground came into view, crowded with weekend families enjoying the sunny afternoon. Alexander slowed his steps, scanning the area with anxious eyes. And then he saw them. 4 small figures racing around the jungle gym, their laughter carrying across the park. One of the boys, Owen, he thought, was at the top of the slide, waving for his siblings to watch. The girls were taking turns on the swings, seeing who could go higher, while the other boy examined something in the sand with intense concentration. And there, sitting on a bench with a book in her lap, was Elena. She looked up regularly from her reading to check on the children, smiling at their antics. She looked peaceful, content. Alexander found a bench at a careful distance, his throat tight with emotion. For just this moment, he wasn't a tech billionaire or a corporate shark or even a man with a complicated past. He was simply a father, seeing his children play, feeling a love so powerful and unexpected it nearly brought him to his knees. As he watched Lily perform a precarious balance act on the edge of the sandbox, her face a mask of determined concentration so like his own, Alexander made a silent promise to all four of them. Somehow he would find a way to be part of their lives, not disrupting the stable world Elena had created, but adding to it. They deserved to know him, and he desperately wanted to know them. The how of it all remained unclear, but the why had never been more certain. For 3 weeks, Alexander lived a double life. In the mornings, he took video calls with his executive team and signed digital documents. In the afternoons, he volunteered at the STEM Academy, working with groups of bright-eyed children who had no idea that one of the world's richest men was helping them build miniature robots and solar panels. The quadruplets group quickly became his favorite. They were extraordinary, not just in intelligence, but in the way they worked together, 4 minds moving as one while still maintaining their distinct personalities. Owen was the practical one, always concerned with whether something would actually work in the real world. But what if it rains? He'd ask about their outdoor water purifier. What if someone doesn't have tools to fix it? David was the theorist, happiest when exploring new concepts. What if we used ultraviolet light instead? He'd suggest eyes alight with possibilities. Rose was the builder, her small hands surprisingly skilled at assembling delicate components. The connection isn't strong enough here, she'd murmur, already reaching for a better solution. And Lily was the heart, the one who remembered that their inventions were meant to help people. "Can we make it cheaper so more families can have one?" she'd ask, her concern genuine. All 4 had inherited his analytical mind and Elena's compassion, a combination that humbled Alexander each time he worked with them. "Mr. Reed, look," Lily called out one Tuesday afternoon, waving him over to their table. "We fixed the filtration problem." Alexander crouched beside her, examining the clever modification the children had made to their water system. "That's excellent thinking," he said, genuine pride warming his voice. "How did you come up with this solution?" "Rose thought of using the layered approach," Owen explained. "But it was David's idea to add the charcoal," Rose added quickly. "And Owen figured out how to keep it from clogging," David continued. "We all did it together," Lily concluded with a satisfied nod. Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. These children didn't just look like him. They carried the best parts of him, the creativity, the problem-solving skills, the determination. But they had something he had only recently begun to rediscover: joy in the work itself, not just in the achievement. "You make an exceptional team," he told them softly. "Mom says that's because we've been together since before we were born," Lily informed him solemnly. In her belly, Alexander swallowed hard. "Your mom sounds very wise." "She is," all 4 responded in unison, then broke into giggles at their accidental chorus. As the days passed, Alexander found himself living for these moments, the small interactions, the gradual building of trust. The children began seeking him out, saving their questions for Mr. Reed rather than other volunteers. "My mom says you're important," Lily told him one day as she helped him clean up after class. "She says you run a big company." Alexander froze, his heart suddenly racing. "You told your mom about me?" Lily nodded. "We tell Mom everything. She likes to know what we learn each day." "And what did she say about me?" Alexander asked carefully. "She got really quiet," Lily said, her small brow furrowed in thought. "Then she asked lots of questions about what you look like and what you teach us. Then she said we should be extra polite to you because you paid for our new school building." Alexander nodded slowly. "I see. Are you friends with my mom?" Lily asked with a child's directness. "She seemed to know your name already." Before Alexander could formulate a response, Dr. Winters called from across the room. "Lily, your mother's here to pick you up." Alexander turned to see Elena standing in the doorway. Their eyes met across the classroom and time seemed to stop. She looked exactly the same and completely different. Her hair was shorter with strands of silver at the temples that hadn't been there 7 years ago. Her face had new lines around the eyes and mouth, but her gaze was as direct and clear as ever. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lily broke the spell, running to her mother with excited chatter about the day's activities. The other 3 children quickly joined her, surrounding Elena in a whirlwind of voices and energy. Elena hugged them automatically, her eyes never leaving Alexander's face. "Children," she said finally, her voice steady despite the paleness of her face. "Please wait for me in the hallway for a moment. I need to speak with Mr. Reed." The quadruplets looked between the 2 adults with curious expressions but filed out obediently. "Stay where I can see you," Elena called after them, positioning herself in the doorway so she could watch both the hallway and Alexander. When they were alone as they could be, with Dr. Winters still tidying up on the far side of the classroom, Elena spoke. "First, so it is you," she said quietly. "The children described their new teacher, but I thought it had to be a coincidence. Alexander Reed wouldn't be teaching elementary school science in Bayshore." Alexander took a step toward her, then stopped when she tensed. "Elena, why are you here?" She cut him off, her voice low but intense. "Of all the academies your foundation funded, why this one? Why this classroom?" Alexander met her gaze directly. "I didn't know, Elena. Not until the opening day when I saw them. I had no idea you were pregnant when we divorced." A flash of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed her face before it hardened again. "And now that you know?" "Now I'd like to talk," Alexander said simply. "Not here. Somewhere private?" Elena glanced at the children waiting in the hallway, then back at Alexander. "I don't think that's a good idea." "They're my children too, Elena." Her eyes flashed. "Are they? You haven't been their father for 7 years." "Because I didn't know they existed," Alexander countered, keeping his voice level with effort. Elena looked away, her jaw tight. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "Then let's have it somewhere else, please." Dr. Winters approached, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right?" Elena forced a smile. "Yes, just catching up with an old acquaintance." Alexander didn't miss her careful choice of words. "Not friend. Not husband. Acquaintance. Elena and I know each other from New York," he explained smoothly. Dr. Winters looked between them with interest. What a small world. "Well, Mr. Reed, your contributions to our program have been invaluable. The children adore you." Elena's expression flickered at this information. "Thank you," Alexander replied, still looking at Elena. "I found the experience incredibly rewarding." After an awkward moment, Dr. Winters excused herself, leaving them alone again. "Tomorrow," Elena said finally. "We can talk tomorrow. There's a cafe on Harbor Street called the Blue Door. Meet me there at 10 after I drop the children at school." Alexander nodded, relief washing through him. "Thank you. I'm not promising anything," Elena warned. "Just a conversation. That's all I'm asking for right now." Elena studied his face for a long moment as if searching for something. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out to join the children, who immediately surrounded her with questions and stories. Alexander watched them go, his heart pounding. The confrontation he had both dreaded and needed had finally begun. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the Blue Door 20 minutes early, too anxious to wait at the house. The cafe was small and cozy, with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. Exactly the sort of place Elena had always loved, and he had rarely made time for. He chose a table in the back corner, away from the few other patrons, and ordered a black coffee that he didn't touch. Every time the door opened, he looked up expectantly. At exactly 10 o'clock, Elena walked in. She was dressed simply in jeans and a blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Without makeup or designer clothes, she looked younger somehow, more like the woman he had fallen in love with 20 years ago. She spotted him immediately and walked over, her movements controlled and deliberate. A waitress approached, but Elena waved her away, sitting down across from Alexander without removing her jacket. A clear sign she didn't plan to stay long. "How did you find us?" she asked without preamble. "I didn't," Alexander replied honestly. "I had no idea you were in Bayshore when I funded the academy. When I saw the children on opening day, It was like looking in a mirror. Then I remembered this was your hometown, where you said you were moving after the divorce. It wasn't hard to put together. Elena studied him, searching for deception. Finding none, she sighed. Of all the small towns in America. Why didn't you tell me? Alexander asked, the question that had been burning inside him for weeks. You were pregnant when we divorced. Why keep that from me? Elena's hands tightened around her purse. I didn't know until after the papers were signed. And by then, she paused, gathering her thoughts. By then, what was the point? You had made it very clear that your work was your priority. A wife didn't fit into that life. How would 4 babies? That should have been my choice to make, Alexander said, trying to keep the hurt from his voice. Like all the choices you made during our marriage? Elena countered. The missed anniversaries? The canceled vacations? The nights I ate dinner alone while you worked? Alexander felt the familiar guilt rising in him. I made mistakes, Elena, many of them. But keeping my children from me, I was protecting them. Elena's voice rose slightly before she controlled it again. You think I wanted to raise 4 children alone? You think that was easier than having their father involved? But I couldn't bear the thought of them becoming collateral damage in your single-minded quest for success, being disappointed when Daddy missed another birthday, another school play, another bedtime. Her words hit Alexander like physical blows because he knew they held truth. The man he had been 7 years ago would have failed these children just as he had failed their mother. I've changed, he said quietly. Elena gave him a skeptical look. Have you really? Or did you just see 4 little extensions of yourself and decide you wanted to add them to your collection of achievements? The accusation stung, but Alexander forced himself to consider it honestly. Was that what this was? Another acquisition? Another challenge to conquer? I don't know what kind of father I would have been 7 years ago, he admitted finally. Probably not a very good one. But I know that seeing them, knowing them these past few weeks has woken something in me I didn't know was there. They're extraordinary, Elena. You've done an amazing job raising them. Something in Elena's expression softened slightly at the genuine compliment. They are extraordinary, she agreed. And they're happy. We have a good life here. I don't want to disrupt that, Alexander assured her. But I would like to be part of it, in whatever way you think is best for them. Elena was silent for a long moment. And if I say no? If I tell you to go back to New York and leave us alone? Would you fight me in court? Use your billions to take them from me? Alexander met her gaze steadily. No, never. If you truly believe I would harm them by being in their lives, I'll walk away. It would break my heart, but I'll do it. Surprise flickered across Elena's face. She had clearly expected a different answer from the hard-driving businessman she had been married to. You really have changed, she murmured. Not completely, Alexander said with a small smile. I'm still stubborn as hell. And I still want to be part of their lives. But I'm asking for your help, not threatening to go around you. Elena looked down at her hands, thinking. When she looked up again, her expression was resolute. I need time. This isn't just about you and me anymore. There are 4 children whose worlds could be turned upside down. Alexander nodded. I understand. And if we do this, Elena continued, it would need to be gradual. No dramatic revelations, no sudden disruptions. And absolutely no using them in publicity for your company or foundation. Agreed, Alexander said immediately, on all counts. Elena stood, signaling the end of their conversation. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise right now. As she turned to leave, Alexander called after her softly. They have your kindness, you know, your compassion. That's the best part of them. Elena paused, her back to him. For a moment, he thought she might say something more. Instead, she simply nodded once and walked out the door, leaving Alexander alone with his cooling coffee and a fragile, newborn hope. 3 days passed with no word from Elena. Alexander continued his volunteer work at the STEM Academy, but the quadruplets were noticeably absent. Each morning he checked the classroom hopefully, only to feel his heart sink when they weren't there. He wondered if Elena had pulled them out completely, if his presence had cost the children something they loved. On the 4th day, his phone rang with an unknown local number. Alexander Reed, he answered, trying to keep the tension from his voice. It's Elena, came the reply. We need to talk again. Can you come to the house? The children will be at their grandmother's for dinner. Alexander's pulse quickened. Of course. What time? 6. I'll text you the address. The call ended before he could say more. Alexander stared at his phone, a mixture of hope and anxiety churning in his stomach. Was this a good sign, or was she going to tell him to leave town and never contact them again? At precisely 6 o'clock, Alexander stood on the porch of a modest blue cottage 3 blocks from the beach. The small front yard was well tended, with a flower garden and 4 distinct bike sizes propped against the fence, visual evidence of the 4 lives inside. He knocked, and seconds later, Elena opened the door. She looked tired but composed, wearing simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair pulled back. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Alexander entered, immediately taking in the details of the home his children had grown up in. The living room was comfortable and lived in, with bookshelves overflowing and framed children's artwork covering the walls. A science fair trophy sat proudly on the mantel next to school photos. 4 distinct personalities were evident even in the scattered belongings. A robot kit left half-assembled on the coffee table, a sketchbook open to a detailed drawing, a collection of rocks labeled with scientific names, a chapter book face down on the sofa. This was a real home, he realized. Not a showpiece like his penthouse, but a place where people actually lived and grew and loved each other. "Would you like something to drink?" Elena asked, breaking into his thoughts. "Water is fine," Alexander replied, following her to the kitchen. The refrigerator door was covered with drawings, schedules and photographs held up by colorful magnets. A height chart on the door frame showed 4 sets of measurements, carefully dated over the years. "You've created a wonderful home for them," Alexander said softly. Elena handed him a glass of water. "I've done my best," she replied, her voice careful, neutral. "Let's sit." They moved to the kitchen table, a sturdy wooden piece with signs of daily use, small nicks and paint smudges, evidence of homework and art projects and family meals. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Elena began after a moment of silence, "and about what's best for the children." Alexander waited, hardly daring to breathe. "They've been asking about you," she continued, "wondering why their favorite teacher hasn't been at school this week." "I've been there," Alexander said quickly. "They haven't," Elena nodded. "I kept them home. I needed time to think without them seeing you and becoming more attached before I decided what to do." She took a deep breath. "I've also been thinking about why I never told you about the pregnancy. At the time, I told myself it was to protect them from disappointment, and that was partly true. But I was also hurt and angry over the marriage ending. It felt like power, I suppose. The one thing you couldn't control or buy or manage." Alexander absorbed this, finding no words in his defense. "That wasn't fair to you," Elena admitted, "and possibly not fair to them either. They deserve to know where they came from." Who they came from? Alexander felt a spark of hope. "Does that mean—" "It means I'm willing to try," Elena said carefully. "For their sake. But we need clear boundaries and expectations. This can't be about you swooping in with your billions to play Santa Claus or showing up when it's convenient between board meetings." "I understand," Alexander said earnestly. "I want to be a real father to them, Elena, not just a visitor or a checkbook." Elena studied him, searching for sincerity. "You'd need to be consistent. Children need reliability, not grand gestures. If you say you'll be somewhere, you have to be there, even if some business emergency comes up." "I'll make it work," Alexander promised. "I've already been restructuring the company leadership. My COO has taken over daily operations. I can run most things remotely from here." Elena looked surprised. "You're planning to stay in Bayshore?" Alexander nodded. "I've purchased the house I'm in now, and I'm establishing a tech campus here to justify my permanent relocation to the board." "You've thought this through," Elena said, sounding genuinely impressed. "I've had 7 years of being successful and empty," Alexander replied honestly. "Now I have a chance at something that actually matters. I'm not going to mess it up." Elena was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How do you think we should tell them?" The question sent a wave of relief through Alexander. She was going to let him be part of their lives. "I think we should be honest but simple. They don't need all the complicated adult details. Just that I'm their father. I didn't know about them until recently, and now that I do, I want very much to be in their lives." Elena nodded slowly. "And about us? Our past. Just that we were married once, grew apart, but care about them very much. They don't need to know about the arguments or the hurt. That's between us, and what about now? Between us?" Elena asked, her voice carefully controlled. Alexander met her gaze. That's up to you, Elena. I know I hurt you. I know I was a terrible husband in many ways. I wouldn't expect you to forgive that, much less want to try again. I'm just grateful for any role you'll allow me in their lives. Elena looked down at her hands. You really have changed. Having your entire worldview shattered tends to do that, Alexander said with a small smile. Finding out you have 4 children you never knew about puts things in perspective. A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's face. I imagine it does. She stood up suddenly. Come with me. I want to show you something. Alexander followed her down a hallway to a room at the back of the house. Elena opened the door to reveal what was clearly her home office and art studio. Canvases leaned against the walls, and a desk in the corner held a computer surrounded by bills and school forms. Elena went to a filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and removed a thick photo album. She handed it to Alexander without a word. He opened it and felt his breath catch. The first page showed a very pregnant Elena, her belly enormous with what he now knew were 4 growing babies. I kept records, Elena said quietly. Even though I didn't tell you about them, I documented everything. Their birth, first steps, first words, first day of school, everything. Alexander turned the pages slowly, his vision blurring. There they were. 4 tiny babies in the hospital, impossibly small. Elena looked exhausted but radiant. The next pages showed their growth. First smiles, first solid foods, first birthdays. 4 distinct personalities emerging. 4 lives he had missed. I never told them negative things about you, Elena continued as he looked through the album. I just said you lived far away and worked a lot. I kept your old business magazine covers to show them when they asked what you looked like. Told them they got their brains from you. Thank you for that, Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. You could have made them hate me. You had every right to, Elena shook her head. Hate isn't something I wanted in their hearts, no matter what happened between us. Alexander closed the album carefully, overwhelmed by the gift she had just given him, a window into the years he had lost. What happens now? He asked. We take it slow, Elena said firmly. We tell them together this weekend. Then you start spending time with them, properly as their father. Maybe one afternoon a week at first, then more as they adjust. You continue volunteering at the academy so they see you in different contexts. We present a united front about this being a good thing, not a source of tension. Alexander nodded, willing to accept any terms she set. And us? Elena sighed. Let's focus on the children first. We have a lot of history to work through, Alexander. A lot of hurt. I'm not saying never, but I am saying not now. That's fair, Alexander replied. More than fair. They talked for another hour, working out practical details and boundaries. As Alexander prepared to leave, he turned to Elena at the door. I never stopped loving you, you know, he said quietly. Even when I was too blind and stupid to show it properly. Elena's expression softened slightly. The man I loved is still in there somewhere. I've seen glimpses of him these past weeks. But we're different people now, Alexander. We've both been shaped by these 7 years apart. Better people, I think, Alexander suggested. Maybe so, Elena conceded with a small smile. Time will tell. The weekend came quickly. Alexander could barely focus on anything, knowing that today his children would learn who he really was. He and Elena had agreed to tell them at the beach, their favorite place, where they would feel comfortable and free. He arrived first, walking along the shore in the morning light, rehearsing what he would say. How did you explain something like this to 7-year-olds? How would they react? Would they be happy? Confused? Angry? He saw them before they saw him. Elena walking down the beach path with the 4 children running ahead, their excited voices carrying on the breeze. As always, the sight of them hit him with a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly took his breath away. Lily spotted him first. Mr. Reed, she called, waving enthusiastically. What are you doing here? The other 3 looked up, their faces lighting with recognition. They ran toward him, surrounding him with questions and stories about their week away from school. Children, Elena said as she joined them, her voice gentle but serious. Mr. Reed and I have something important to talk to you about. Let's sit on the big rock over there. The children's expressions turned curious as they followed their mother to the large, flat rock that made a natural bench. Alexander and Elena sat with the children between them. You know how we've talked about your dad sometimes, Elena began carefully, about how he lives far away and works a lot. 4 small heads nodded. Well, Elena continued, something very special has happened. Your dad has come to Bayshore because he wants to know you and be part of our family. The children looked confused. Is he coming to meet us today? Owen asked, looking around the beach. Elena took a deep breath. He's already here, she said, glancing at Alexander. Mr. Reed is your father. 4 pairs of eyes, his eyes, turned to stare at Alexander in stunned silence. I didn't know about you until I came to the academy opening, Alexander explained gently. But as soon as I saw you, I knew you were my children. You have my eyes and my smile and my way of thinking about problems. If you're our dad, why didn't you live with us before? David asked, his analytical mind immediately finding the logical question. Because I didn't know Mom was going to have you when we decided not to be married anymore, Alexander answered honestly. And then I didn't know where you were until I came to Bayshore and saw you. Are you going to take us away? Rose asked worriedly, moving closer to Elena. No, sweetheart, Alexander assured her quickly. I would never take you away from your mom or your home. I just want to be part of your life now, if that's okay with you. The children looked at each other, having one of their silent, quadruplet conversations that still amazed Alexander. Finally, Lily turned to him with solemn eyes. Do you promise to come to our science fair next month? She asked. Alexander felt his heart expand with love. I promise. And will you teach us more about computers? David added. Absolutely. Can we still call you Mr. Reed at school? Owen wondered practically. Alexander looked at Elena, who nodded slightly. For now, that might be best at school. But when we're together like this, you can call me whatever feels right. The children seemed to consider this acceptable. Rose, always the most cautious, had one more question. Does this mean you and Mom will live together like Tommy's parents? Elena answered this one. No, honey. Your dad will have his own house and we'll have ours. But he'll be here in Bayshore and you'll spend time with both of us. The children nodded, processing this arrangement. Then Lily, always the boldest, stood up and took Alexander's hand. Do you want to see the tide pools? She asked. We found a starfish yesterday. Alexander looked at this small person who was part of him, offering him a chance he had never dared to hope for. I would love to see the tide pools, he said, his voice thick with emotion. As the 5 of them walked toward the water, Elena following at a thoughtful distance, Alexander felt a small hand slip into his, then another, then 2 more. Surrounded by his children, his miracles, he knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever adjustments they all needed to make, this was where he belonged. And when Lily looked up at him with his own eyes and said Dad for the first time, not as a slip or a question, but as a simple statement of fact, Alexander Reed, billionaire tech CEO and master of the corporate world, felt his carefully constructed walls crumble completely. Some fortunes, he realized, couldn't be measured in dollars or stock options or company valuations. Some were counted in small hands, curious minds, and second chances that came when you least expected them but needed them most.